I'm Derek and welcome back to Fun Scale Models. This series is building the Park Flyer P40C Tomahawk. In this episode, we'll be continuing and completing the covering of the model. The landing gear pods are pretty straightforward. There are several laminations of different parts labeled G. So it'll be G2 through G6. There are two G6s, one G5, one G4, and one G3, one G2. And you stack them up and glue them like this. One thing that I noticed though is G5 actually really should be a G6. I just extended this out a little bit. This will be glued to the bottom of the wing, and this needs to be round into sort of a half circle shape. You also need to sort of round the edges on the bottom of this as well. Something I found to be actually a really good guide is to use G2. And so you can just mark that with a pen and start filing it. There's also a spot in here for the brass tubing. This is the 3/16 brass tubing. And if you need to, just make sure that if you need to, if it's not fitting in there, just use a file, a square file to sort of notch it. Again, that's only if you're going to use the plug-in landing gear. If you're not using them at all, you don't need to add the brass tube. So we'll go ahead and we'll do some sanding and shaping of these. So here are some of the small sub-assemblies for the model. These here are the fillets that blend the vertical into the horizontal. And they're just 1/4-inch balls so that I just rounded in shape and sort of tapered into a teardrop. This here is the primary intake on the top of the model. Up in the nose you can see here that I've sanded a slight concave to it, and this is that specifically cut part for it. These are the nose machine gun blisters. They will need to be sort of beveled at an angle so that they sit pretty much upright and vertical in comparison to the nose. And then this is one of the nearly finished gear pods. I've rounded it multiple different directions. What I'll probably do is, and it's not necessary, but I'm going to do it just to help add a little bit of touch to the model. I'll fill in some of the low areas with some lightweight spackle, just like we did when we were covering up the etching. These parts, and then this one still needs to be shaped. These parts will be then covered separately and attached to the fuselage and wing as applicable. Here are the landing gear pods. I've sanded them, sealed them, and covered them with tissue. I basically did one wrap in this section here and then did a wrap around the front using small slits in the tissue to be able to get it to lay down, and then I put another cap piece. I've also found too that using like a popsicle stick or something like that to sort of go over it, even after it's slightly dried, really helps to knock down all the edges and really smooth it out. I've already trimmed out the tissue for the brass insert. I've got to still do that on this one. And then once they're glued onto the wing, I'll add another small piece of tissue here to blend it into the wing itself. And then once that's finally done, there's either a green or a brown piece that comes on the top that blends with the top of the wing. Some additional progress on the model. Here you can see the tail section has been glued on. Just used CA to attach it. And as mentioned before, there'll be some filler pieces that I'll be adding here and there. I've also started working on the wing fillets. So there's a piece of balsa wood that gets added here. This is a part that's cut. You do need to trim down this corner of the fuselage a little bit, and it gets glued to this stringer right here. What I'm doing is I'm attaching one side of the cardstock wing fillet, and then what I'll do is once the top piece is in place, I'll glue this down and then trim along this line as needed. On this sheet here are a couple of parts that we're ready to now install. The first one is the main wing fillets. I'm going to go ahead and cut those out with the sharp scissors, as well as the rear canopy inner section. This goes in the area right behind the cockpit. We'll go ahead and we'll cut these out. So with the right wing fillet cut out, I'm going to go ahead and start to form it. The best thing to do is to roll it around something cylindrical like this pen here. So you want it to be curved like this. And once we get to this stage, we're about ready to start trying to apply it to the fuselage. To this stage, I do recommend setting up some sort of little stand for your model. I just made this out of just some cardboard box that I had from one of my shipments, but the model sits nicely in it and it helps protect it. It's also usable in different directions, so you can also set it between the cockpit section as well. It helps protect it when you're working on it and make it easier to manage. With our preformed fillet, it's going to lay in this area here. Now this part does take some time to sort of get the right fit. And you may need to glue it in sections, but I will try and do it all at once. And it takes your time. Make sure you get about as good as a fit you can get while it's dry before adding the glue. I'm going to use PVA to attach this. So the wing fillet has been glued in place. Overall, it turned out pretty decent. There's a few areas I'm not happy with. I've got some bubbles and bumps there. Another thing I found out is the balsa wood piece underneath, I didn't sand that down smooth enough and low enough that we get the middle of a ridge here. But other than that, I'm not too unhappy with it. I'll make sure when I do the other side that I go ahead and give this balsa piece a good sanding. The other part that I was working on while that was drying was the rear canopy section here. This is something you print on heavy paper or cardstock. And that fits in just like that. And I'll use PVA to glue that in place. One thing though, this did take a bit of trial and error and gentle trimming here and there to get it to fit the size. As you can see on this piece here, there's a black square that goes around the perimeter. That trim to that outer color first and then keep moving inwards as you test fit it. The one nice thing that you can do though is once you've trial cut the other side, you can use it to make a pattern to trim the other half. And here is the panel added. Both sides were added at the same time. Work on the canopy is next. So the first thing to do is to print out this sheet here. It's the canopy sheet. You can actually print this on standard weight paper. You don't necessarily need to go cardstock. And here's why. We're actually going to be doubling up the thickness of this paper by folding this section and this section together. So the first thing to do is to cut out along the square outlines the three main panels. So you can see I've cut out the three panels here. Along this dashed line where it says fold line, I've very lightly scored and it allowed me to fold it in half. And it's important that you get this about as close to this line as possible. Then we can go ahead and open it back up and put a pretty heavy coat of the spray adhesive on the inside here. And again, fold it back in half and lay it flat. We'll do that and we'll come back. All right, so we have our three patterns here that have been sprayed and folded over. And so what you're basically doing is creating the back side of the canopy frame. You do want to let this dry thoroughly, so maybe give it 30 minutes to an hour, and then we can start cutting out the center sections and then apply it to the plastic film. So here you can see the patterns have been cut out with the interior sections removed. The next step would be to attach it to some very lightweight clear plastic. This is 3 mil clear plastic sheet. I think I picked it up off of Amazon. You get a whole bunch of them and you'll never run out. The next steps will be to spray the back side pretty heavily with the spray adhesive. So about the same amount that you did to attach the two layers of paper, and place this down on top of the clear plastic. We'll do that and then we'll let it dry. All right, so we've got our center section. We're gonna do that first. I've got my Elmer's spray adhesive. Gave it a nice liberal coat. We got our plastic. Like that. And then I'm going to burnish it from the back side. All right. We'll let this dry and trim it out later. So all three panels have now been attached. We want to let this dry thoroughly, and then what we're going to do is on the top side here, trim along the grain outside lines. We're ready to glue the front windscreen onto the model. We're going to start by gluing the center of the top and the bottom to the hatch. I'm going to be using Canopy glue. It works really, really well, and it does dry clear. I'll go ahead and I'll put a small little bit amount on a piece of scrap here. So we want to make sure that that little dished portion right there goes onto the fuselage. And I'll just put a little dab right there. A little dab there. A little dab there. And just let that sit there for a few minutes and dry. The rear section is cut out. You can see that I cut along that line there, so there is no white paper left. If there is, just go ahead and scrape that off with your fingernail. It comes up pretty clean. I've sort of pre-bent along this center line. This is going to be glued onto the rear decking of the cockpit area. Again, along just the top first. I'll let that dry and then we'll bend it down to actually glue these side pieces on. It's always good to test fit it a couple of times before actually gluing it.